Hey everyone, it's the host of All Across America, Marco Vig, jumping in for a few seconds before the show to thank y'all for listening, to let you know that I want to hear from you. Tell me what you like about the show, and send me your suggestions too. Follow us on Instagram at AllXAmerica, or visit the website, allacrossamerica.net, and you can use our contact page there. If you want to support us, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/allacrossamerica. Try to respond personally to everyone who reaches out, so say hello. All right, on with the show. Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America.
So my best line is lost.
Yeah, what was your best line?
No, this is like a running deposition.
Well, we have.
I expect a lot out of this.
We have Jonathan Vigliotti, and as you may have anticipated, we know each other. Jonathan happens to be my brother, so if you detect some sarcasm or some conflict, that's all in good fun. I wanted to start by the top two podcasts in the country are both crime podcasts. And I don't know, you've done a lot of work with 48 Hours. Just wanted to get a sense from you. What's the fascination with crime? And maybe you could tell us the two big stories that you worked on.
I think the fascination from like the 48 Hours standpoint, most of the stories, if not all of the stories that we cover, they're unresolved.
Okay.
And there is a big focus, especially now, a lot of people that consume this content like to be part of it. So the idea that there is an unresolved murder or missing person case, and that you as someone at home watching this with Google and the internet at your fingertips, the possibility that you could play a role. I think a lot of people are driven to watching that kind of content for that reason. And the worst case scenario, which is what these stories often lay out, people who do go missing, murders, people are always fascinated by what is scary. So I think there's also that element to it. With 48 Hours, there's a good component of justice too. Seeing the people that have done bad things, that are prime suspects, eventually getting arrested. So like one of the stories that we did was Kristen Smart. She was a college student in San Luis Obispo, California. And on Memorial Day weekend, she went missing. And this was back in the late 90s. And so jump ahead 20 years later, still no sign of Kristen Smart, and no progress in the investigation. Early on, there was a lot of victim shaming, a lot of witness accounts that she had been drinking, was intoxicated, and may have run off, may have gone camping. Obviously, that was not the case. A suspect was identified pretty early on, but there wasn't enough DNA evidence because of all the missteps.
Right.
And, when you jump ahead 2 decades later, it's something like 48 Hours, that spotlight that we shine and that program shines, that I think ultimately, at least in this case, pushed the sheriff's department, who was already working on this case. It wasn't a cold case, but when you have that renewed interest that comes from a show like 48 Hours, there was also an incredible podcast called In Your Own Backyard, which also I think played the biggest role in reinvigorating the investigation. I think that those kinds of programs play that kind of role, and I think they attract a big audience because of that.
And what was his name? Paul Flores. He's been charged with murder now. The trial hasn't taken place, but he's been charged with murder.
Yeah, he was charged last year when we did the first report. He had not been charged with murder. Okay. We had gone and knocked on his door. We did what do we call it? An unscheduled interview.
Right.
At his home. He was not very polite, understandably. People don't want cameras just showing up at their front door. But it was 6 months after that, maybe a little bit longer, when police finally collected enough evidence. A lot of that evidence we still don't know exactly the extent of it, in order to at least arrest him and charge him with murder.
And he was always the primary suspect.
He was early on. He was identified as one of the last people to see Kristen.
Okay,
but he maintained that he lost sight of her when they got to the fork in the road that led.
Okay.
And one part of that fork led to his dorm, the other led to hers. And there was no surveillance video back then in that area that could prove him wrong. And it took so long to go and collect DNA evidence, to go and look at his dorm room, that by the time they did, it had already been cleaned. So a lot of missteps were made. Those first 48 hours are so critical. I think it took like a week before. I could be wrong.
That was a campus police issue,
but it took a period of time.
That was a campus police issue, was it?
It was campus. It was campus police, and then also the local police department. And in this case, I'm sure played a role in streamlining communication between campus police and local police, because there was also a lot of confusion about who was taking charge, who was responsible. The campus police, though, led the way in the first few days, and then the local police and the sheriff's department stepped in.
Now, wasn't there a law or some sort of, in California, the law was changed in terms of jurisdiction between campus police and local police because of that case?
It sounds like you've researched that and you probably know the answer.
I don't know.
That
I
sounds right.
I saw it someplace else. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
I was trying to be incredibly vague when I said that earlier, and you just called me out, because I don't know if there was a law. I feel like, yes, we reported on that, but honestly, it's I could be conflating two different cases, which is easy to do when you, because these are months long. Like when we do a story, they are months long projects, and you're talking about many hours of interviews, many more hours of collecting information, reaching out to sources off camera. And while it is all boiled down neatly into an hour-long segment, which really is like 42 minutes when you leave out that gap for commercials, it's like there's a lot that is beneath the surface on that, so it's easy to get lost in it.
And you interviewed his parents, or there was a clip of his parents?
Paul Flores' parents?
Yes.
We did not. We reached out to them. They did not. They did not respond.
Okay.
And the lawyer representing them, I don't even think, responded. But a local news affiliate, a reporter with the local news, spoke with the mother, Paul Flores' mother.
All right. And because
the mother who maintained his innocence.
And it was so easy to see right through her. And the reason I asked that is because it was similar with the Lori Vallow story, when you had interviewed the family. It became pretty clear, and I'm not a body language expert, but you could tell that there was some deception there. How do you sit there with a straight face? And I guess you're a professional, but you got to be holding back, or are you just letting the story unfold, and that's really it, and you've kind of got to go in there without any preconceived ideas?
Well, when you say deception, who do you remember what part you felt like you were being deceived? Who it was that I was interviewing that made you feel like they were being
I can't remember. I think it might have been the mother and sister, I think, were interviewed at the same time.
Oh yeah. And they were very sweet people, and you go into interviews like that. You have to remember their collateral damage in all of this.
Yeah.
They had no part in any of what unfolded. They were not near Lori Vallow or the children. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It just says that the camera is disabled due to slow internet connection. So just making sure I'm still here. So like when you go into an interview like that, like I never once thought like I need to really hit hard on them, like
Right.
they're somehow responsible or
Right.
connected to
Yeah,
this
that's
beyond their
interesting.
relationship. So going into that interview was about really trying to understand Lori Vallow's backstory, who she was
Right.
as a sister, as a daughter, to get a better understanding of what happened to what could possibly have happened to these children. So at that time when we interviewed them, the children were still missing.
Right.
Nobody knew where they were.
Yeah.
And by missing, they were dead, we later found out, and buried in their stepfather's backyard. But at the time of that interview, nobody knew where they were. And we were just trying to get an understanding of what was credible, what was not credible, for all the things that were said about Lori. We knew that she was kind of into the prepping community.
Okay.
She had some extreme religious beliefs about
Okay.
the second coming and
Right.
preparing for the end of the world, the apocalypse. There was an idea that she could have hidden the children in an underground bunker with a bunch of other like-minded people.
Okay.
So early on, we were just trying to get a sense of, is something like that even credible?
Right.
We did, at the same time, she had a long history of issues with exes. Her previous husband suddenly died. Her brother killed. He claimed in self-defense. Police later said it was not self-defense.
Right.
He killed her other husband, and we were trying to kind of get a sense of how they could sit back and see that unfold.
Right.
And again, they were, I think, a little bit blinded too by the shock of it all.
Yeah.
That's at least the sense I got from them. They seemed very genuine, and they seemed to be processing as they were being asked these questions and answering it. It seemed like in some cases, for the first time, they were starting to confront some of those difficult questions and like process them, like truly process them.
There's an old expression, nobody's so blind as he who refuses to see.
Hmm.
And I mean, do you think,
Where's that from?
I don't know. It's just an old expression. And it seems like it fits in this case, in that there was just so many red flags after red flags that, I mean, who wants to think that children,
Yeah. But they maintained she was a really great mother and loved her kids, and everybody we interviewed too said the same exact thing. Like, it's really easy to pick up on when you're being fed something.
Okay.
Like when you think somebody's not being genuine. Like, that's just and I don't know how to describe sensing that. It's just something that I think you hone or you learn from experience, and in this field you learn that quickly. But everybody seemed very genuine. Very genuine.
No. All right. One of the times that you didn't hold back, or you tried to hold back, was with the water sommelier that you did for CBS Sunday Morning, which was not too far from your place in LA.
Well, that's a hard turn from 48 hours to water.
Well,
thank God. Yes, let's talk about something that is not about death at my time.
Well, he seemed like a really nice guy. He even said, "I like people who say that this is crazy." So I'm going to talk about him, and I'm sure he'd appreciate it. But yeah, first of all, he got an Einstein visa. And, you could give that to nuclear fusion scientists, transplant surgeons, but we got a water taster. Did you learn anything?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's he has done the rounds even before we interviewed him, with water and with water tasting on television and online. And it is like, it's easy to make him the butt of many jokes. I think, to his credit and his success, he has welcomed it, and he has remained humble and just like overall fun and easygoing. Cool. And yeah. I don't think he takes himself too seriously, but he does take the topic of water and fresh water and where our water comes from seriously. And the bottles that he had there were like 5 bottles or something. And you could really taste the difference. Like, there was an actual discernible taste from bottle to bottle. And a lot of the bottles were not a lot. I mean, there were only 5 in total, but like 2 or 3 of them were bottles of water that I had had before, like Fiji water.
Right.
But when you compare Fiji water, which is spring water tapped at its source, compared to um, filtered water,
Oh, well, that's
or no,
Dasani.
purified water. I'm sorry.
Yes. Dasani is
Yeah, yeah.
apparently
And
Detroit
he
tap
hates
water.
Dasani. He hates Dasani. I have
As
no
he
opinion
should.
about it. But he hates Dasani. And he very much hates Dasani. But you can taste the difference. And there is he described it as like a creamy texture to the Fiji, creamy yet crisp to Fiji, and it was super creamy, and I appreciate it. Like, I just take water for granted. I don't think that much about the different flavors of water or the different texture of water. And after that, I definitely have started to think a little bit more about the water that I drink. I still like tap water. He's not against tap water.
Okay.
He likes tap water. He just doesn't like plants or companies that bottle purified tap water.
Fair enough. Which, I mean, it's just silly. Just you're putting tap water
Like a brand you may have
plastic.
mentioned.
It's plastic. It's just a waste of plastic. Did he do still water, or is it sparkling water, or just only still?
He did still and sparkling. He did this one called Vichy,
Okay.
which is Spanish.
Okay.
It's a Spanish water. It almost tastes like Alka-Seltzer, like super rich in minerals,
Okay.
and like
That's
almost
interesting.
almost with like sodium. It was
Right.
it was intense at first, and afterward, but then your taste buds adjust, and apparently because of all the minerals, and it makes sense because it really did taste like Alka-Seltzer. He said that it helps with hangovers. So
Okay.
I don't know where you could get. Some of these bottles are really hard to get. Like where you're going to find Spanish bottled water, because just importing it is expensive. So you probably have to go to like a specialty store. I have not found it though in any
Specialty
of
water store.
the stores I think.
I mean,
Well,
so
there are places that like go. What were you saying?
but you're supposed to you're supposed to have this water with food.
Yeah, I mean, no, yes, in our case, because we did like a pairing. We did like a tasting with food.
Okay.
And and this is where people really start to roll their eyes when he's like, this water really enhances the flavor of this. But I mean, it makes sense. A crisper, cleaner water probably goes better with lighter, more delicate flavors and textures than some of the heavier, I sound crazy. I live in California.
He's worked his magic on you. I think he's worked it. The one thing I'll have to say, the greatest thing is sparkling water in Italy. When you get an espresso, they really fine places give you a little shot glass of sparkling water, l'acqua frizzante. Now that's really refreshing.
Oh, that's nice.
And it could be any kind of sparkling water. But yeah, I mean, Pellegrino is it is a mineral water, and it has a lighter carbonation than, I don't know, what you would find in, I don't know, LaCroix or whatever the common sparkling water you find in this country. Well, I guess I'll have to check him out. Maybe he's worth that Einstein visa after all.
Well, I mean, I think the reason he got that visa too is because water is a precious life source that we take for granted.
Yes.
And here in the West, where there are water wars, and where yet at the same time as farmers are fighting for access to river water and runoff, there are homeowners and golf courses that are just draining out this water that so many other people need to get by, not just for the beauty of their homes. So I think that he's here and he sees his mission more than pairing water. He said this himself. Like, it's not about him being at a restaurant and being like, you should try this water. I think it's just about bringing more awareness to the water you consume. So like we can move on after this, but there's an interesting place in Mackay, Idaho.
Okay.
Which this was another bottled water that we had called what is it called? I feel like I had a bottle somewhere around, like pure. I do. I see it through the thing. Pure Source or Proud Source. It's called Proud Source. And Mackie, and this is, and I love it, and it's a story I'm going to do in the future. They're a former coal mining town
Okay.
that went bust,
Hmm.
and a sixth generation, I believe, mining family decided to tap into their spring water instead,
Okay.
and is now like, and now that I've told you this, you'll see these bottles in gas stations. They're like tin bottles,
Okay.
so you could reuse them too.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's in Mackey, and they're tapping into another spring in Florida. They're expanding business, but I just thought, it's he's highlighting these communities that are in theory doing good while also reminding people not to take water for granted.
Right. Right. I mean, you've done a lot of work on climate change. Have you done a lot around water? I mean, as you mentioned, it's a big issue in the Southwest and, everywhere from Colorado to LA.
Yeah, more and more. I mean, well, in California, like it's all water. It's all water in the sense that when you don't have it, there's a drought. The drought here is ongoing and historic. I've spoken with and done a number of profiles on farmers and ranchers specifically who've had to sell off their cattle because they can't keep them alive because
Wow.
ranchers say that really they're in the business of grass growing,
Right.
and that grass is what they feed to their cattle.
Right.
So we've covered a lot of water in that sense. The water wars that I spoke about, like we cover that story too up in Mono County, so near a ski resort up there. Where oh God, what's the name of the ski resort? Mammoth. I think
Oh,
it's
right.
Mammoth.
Yeah. Yeah. Mammoth. Sounds right.
Mammoth. Um,
So it's,
and snowfall has been very unpredictable. This year there was like an historic amount of snowfall, but the problem is all that snowfall, which is basically like a frozen reservoir, if by spring it heats up too quickly, all of that melts and
Okay.
it has nowhere to go except seeping through and eventually into the ocean. So
right.
that's an issue too, even though we got I think like, the mountains got like 20 feet of snow in places.
So you're saying it melts too soon?
If it's too hot.
It melts too soon. Almost.
Yeah, because so it's like because mountain glaciers and snowfall turns into ice, which usually turns into glaciers in some cases, especially up north. And that's a frozen reservoir, which over the course of spring and summer slowly melts off.
Gotcha.
So, that tap is slowly releasing water.
Very cool.
And that water over that short period, that long period of time as it percolates through is used and enjoyed by many more people than if there's like a flash heat event and it all melts off quickly. Because where does that water go? It's not like it's being collected. It goes into aqueducts, and it goes into certain areas, but then it just, you're just leaving it on until it completely runs dry, and all that water eventually just makes its way to the ocean.
Have you read Cadillac Desert? Seen Chinatown? Those are the
No,
two.
I have not read Cadillac Desert. But I saw them, but I did see Chinatown.
All right, China. Yeah, I mean Chinatown was one of the most. I mean, it's an LA classic. I mean, it's the screenwriter movie. I saw it years ago, but Cadillac Desert.
Well, I mean that is very much still. Well, that's what laid down the groundwork too for like everything that's unfolding today.
Right.
And at the same time, like LA would not exist today if it wasn't for some of those more sketchy deals,
right,
so to speak, that were forged.
Have you done any stories on climate mitigation? I mean, could we get to the point where desalination plants are going to be important on the coast in, let's say, San Diego or LA County?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've actually done something specific to desalination. I think once, but it was in Florida, so a very long time ago. And I'm not like well read into desalination plants, but from the little that I do know, they're very expensive. They consume a ton of energy to take that salt out of the salt water to make it usable. Um, I think I think what is probably easier and more sustainable in the long run, but not nearly as appealing, like runoff water or like sewage water,
Gray
and
water.
filtering that. And I know that there's discussions, yeah, gray water, and then turning that into, a water source that could be used for fields or for whatever it may be. But there's only a few successful desalinization plants
Israel, I
that I
think,
can
leads.
think of. Yeah, yeah, Israel, and I believe Australia also has a
Okay.
successful one. I could be wrong, but Israel is the one that comes to mind, and that was really the blueprint for a lot of the plans here. In fact, I
Right.
wonder what happened with the desalinization plant, because I went to a groundbreaking in Florida, but that was like
Yeah, I mean,
2011, a long time
people
ago. I
don't
should
want
check
to
back out.
people don't want us to get there, and I hope that we don't. But you kind of have to make sure that we can make things. People need water, regardless of what happens. I
Hmm.
was thinking, you've ever heard of the? Speaking of gray water, there's a Japanese toilet bowl with a sink, and this is common in Japan. I've never been in Japan, but I hear this is common in Japan, where the sink is on top of the toilet bowl. You wash your hands, and that water
Yeah,
cycles into the bowl portion to be reused. So, do you think Americans would ever go for that?
never, never. Woke Americans will go for that, but look at the size of our cars.
Right.
Look at the
Yeah, that's
size of
true.
our dishwashers. Look
Yeah.
at the size of our washing machine. We clearly like things to be separated and bigger, and
Yeah. Yeah.
to take up as much space as possible. So I don't see a lot of people finding comfort in doubling up two rolls,
I mean, you save a lot of
especially one so
space. I
close to the
mean,
toilet.
maybe it would make sense in one of those, micro homes or the 300 square foot, New York City apartments, and I mean, in Japan there is spaces that are
Yeah,
big.
I mean that would make sense, but yeah, and those very but not enough Americans live that kind of lifestyle
Right.
to make a dent in
I,
that world of toilet bowls.
I don't know they call them micro homes. What do they refer to them as? The mini houses. There's a whole movement.
Yeah, like tiny home. I don't know,
Tiny
tiny
homes. There you
homes.
go. The tiny homes. I don't know. I think they would be pretty cool. I mean, it wouldn't be widely adopted, but it'd be pretty cool. Well,
I mean, Mark, I feel like they have those in prisons, by the way.
they
They do.
probably they probably do.
I not that I've been in a prison cell, but I feel like I've seen something very discomforting like that.
Well, so we talked about
It's a great idea, though. It is a great idea. It's a great idea. I just don't think
no,
you asked me if I think Americans
no,
would ever
I
like
don't think so
jump
either.
on board to
I don't think so either.
that.
So we talked about your experience with CBS Sunday Morning and with 48 Hours, but of course you didn't start on the national stage. Maybe you can kind of walk us through your experience and how you got started, and what led you to where you are now.
Oh, I'll give you my resume. It's
There
so
you
much
go.
fun.
Excellent.
I I went to Fordham University, so in the Bronx,
Right.
so not that far from where we grew up. And for those that don't know, and I started working at the NPR affiliate WFUV in the studio that was there on campus, and that was right. I arrived on campus in late August 2001. I signed up for reporting classes at WFUV. They had people at a desk in the library trying to recruit young journalists, and I signed up not thinking much of it, thinking this would be great to explore. I knew I loved photography and I like writing, but I wasn't really sure which direction I would go in. And 9/11 happened,
Wow.
and obviously 9/11 changed the world in so many ways, and changed so many priorities. But it also activated that newsroom. They needed so many people, all hands on deck, that they leaned into that group of papers that they collected from that day. And they started having us, like me and a few other students, go out into the field to report. So I did that and really leaned into journalism after that experience, and spent most of my 4 years there covering the aftermath of 9/11. It played such a big role in the news that we were covering. And I also interned at like networks. So ABC, I interned at 2020 for John Stossel, who was awesome, and at New York One,
Okay.
which was a great experience. Which was a great experience. Like I've never seen people work so hard 24/7
Wow.
as I did, at least at that point in my life at New York One. And after I graduated, I submitted like a bunch of tapes to local news stations.
And those
I was going to stay with NPR. I wanted to do radio.
What's that? Radio.
Well, I wanted to stay in radio because I loved, and I still do love NPR, and I specifically love and loved back then This American Life. So I wanted to do something like that, the immersive, intimate storytelling.
Okay.
I applied for a fellowship at NPR. And at that point, I'd been doing stuff for NPR, the network, occasionally in my role at WFUV. And I thought I would get the fellowship, and I didn't. So then I went into television. Then I was like, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to go into television.
Right.
And I went to Grand Junction. I like submitted tapes everywhere.
Yeah.
Like 30 tapes. And nobody got back to me until the last one in Grand Junction.
Wow.
A place I'd never even heard of or thought of prior to walking into like Borders Books and going into the travel section and just finding a place. Like if I wasn't going to get anything in New York or the tri-state area, I was like, I'm going to go somewhere that's cool.
Cool.
And Grand Junction, which was like one of the smallest markets in the country, also happened to be kind of a cool place. So,
yes.
So I started in Grand Junction, went to Milwaukee for a few. I was in Grand Junction for like a little over a year. Milwaukee as a freelancer for like 4 or 5 months, and then left news to go into like documentary, more longer form storytelling with a place called Plum TV.
Right.
Which I'm not telling you this like you don't know.
Yes.
In Miami. And then when their business format or whatever business model was clearly not sustainable and they were not doing well, I left and went back to local news, worked for the ABC affiliate in Miami before going to New York. So I was at WNBC in New York City for 4 years before going to London for CBS.
So you've been with NBC. I mean, you've been with the local affiliates for NBC, ABC, and the national affiliate with CBS. You've kind of done the trifecta.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, your experience in Grand Junction. I mean, what's a town, I don't know, 50,000 people, if I remember correctly, in western Colorado, not too far from the Utah border. But
is it even that many? God, I felt like it was smaller.
I mean, maybe the market share was 50,000, whatever it was. But I mean, in New York City, you have such.
I'm going to find out right now. I'll Google this.
We grew up with such seasoned journalists. You don't realize when you live in these smaller cities, you get these 22-year-old kids right out of college.
65,000.
65. I was close. Cycling through every year.
That's impressive.
But it was a good. It sounded like, from what I remember from you, it was a great experience because you were doing everything. You were producing and recording and editing and all that, which you wouldn't have done in a larger newsroom.
I mean, it was a great. Your first impression means so much, and that's certainly true when you're starting off in your career. And it was the perfect first impression for news and for television news for me. And that first impression is what sustained me through more difficult times. Like when I was freelancing in Milwaukee, it was to go from one of the smallest cities in the country to a significantly bigger city, like a top 30 or 40 market size city.
Right.
That's a huge change.
Yeah.
Where I was suddenly like the youngest person in the newsroom by like 10 years.
Yeah.
And so what I learned in Grand Junction, the ability to enterprise my own stories, to be more of a self-starter, that really like helped buoy me through, choppier times where it was like a little uncertain and you didn't have people holding your hands through things.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like in retrospect, it was nice that was the number 30 tape that actually got picked up, that if you had entered in a larger market, it would have been a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, to rush ahead, I don't, I understand why people are in such a rush. I'm still in a rush to get to God knows where, but, um, yeah, but to rush into that, I mean, where you're live on television and where if you say something wrong, it matters,
Yes.
and where the pressure of meeting a deadline and going live are all new, they're all
Right.
foreign.
Right.
Um, to try to dive into something like that in a big market, I don't even know. I would not be able to do
I mean,
it at all.
in some ways, it almost seems harder than what you're doing now because it's all, as you said, live. Whereas a lot of the stuff that you're doing now is produced and written and edited. I mean, I know you are doing some live stuff when you're at forest fires or hurricanes, but I mean they're both difficult in
Mhm.
their own way.
Yeah, there are two different skills. Going live, and like it also depends who you're going live for. So in network news for like the CBS evening news, especially the evening news more than the morning show, CBS Mornings, the evening news is very structured. It's only a half an hour show, and
Right.
you're squeezing in all of the top headlines. You don't have endless amounts of time to, at the end of your piece, when you're going live, say something. You
Yeah.
can't just ramble. You can't
Right.
just you can't just I shouldn't say ramble, ad lib. So you're very structured,
Yeah.
and it's 15 seconds. You
Wow.
got 15 seconds to complete a thought, which
It's great.
is a lot of time and not a lot of time.
Yeah.
So you got to really so that's a different skill set than when you're reporting live and there is no time limit.
Right.
I mean, even in like weather situations, like extreme weather, like hurricanes or wildfires, there's always a time limit.
Right.
But I mean, we're talking like a minute or 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and you don't structure that the way
Okay.
that you would structure a 15-second live tag.
And that's
You
where
can be a little bit more extemporaneous.
Right, but that's where things can also go wrong. I think the constriction of the 15
Yeah.
seconds makes it a little bit more comforting, at least for me, than there is that opportunity to ramble on, or I don't know, get swept away by blown over by the
Well,
wind or
kind
whatever.
of. Yeah, you got to keep your wits about you. But I don't know. Like when you're speaking in 15-second clips, it's not natural.
Right, that's
That
true.
I feel like television journalists aren't putting on a voice because they just want to put on a voice. It's like you've got to get condensed facts across very
Okay,
quickly in a way that people will understand it, which means you've got to articulate. You've got to be so brief in a
right,
way that is not natural to the how we talk. I mean, the way I ramble on right now is completely opposite than
gotcha.
how I am allowed to report. Like
Wow,
you can't go off, somewhere and then come back to it and be like, that's how I converse. Like,
right,
no, you've got to be
right.
very, it's like staccato, very structured.
You've solved the puzzle for me of the
So,
newscaster speak, and I never knew why newscasters spoke that way, but now it all makes sense.
well, I mean, I'm making that up, but I think that's why I speak that way. I think I speak that way because it's like, especially and that's why it's best to not try to get more into a story, because like when I look back at some of my earlier work, like I'm trying to get too much into a story, which means I'm speaking so fast
I
to
see.
get everything into a
Right.
piece. And it's just completely not natural. So, yeah, so I've kind of adapted the idea um, of scaling back how much information, just making sure it really is the most important information and giving it the time to breathe so that people who are more and more distracted anyway when they watch television news can focus in on it and kind of retain the information.
So you've been doing. You were talking about some of the more live shots you've been doing. You're kind of on, not to say two beats, but you've done a lot with natural disasters. You were most recently down in Baton Rouge, southern Louisiana, for the
Mhm.
last hurricane they had there, and then you've been covering a lot of forest fires. So can you talk a little bit more about that? And I presume that's
Yeah, well,
ongoing.
and I just came back from a tornado, so I'll talk about the tornado just because it's like super fresh in my mind,
Yeah,
and it's also where I likely got COVID. I had COVID for 2 weeks following the trip,
yeah,
so
yeah.
um, it was because in Kentucky at the time, like a lot of states, it was like I think 1 in 3 people had COVID. But anyway, I pitched a story to go back. So in this case, in when it comes to covering tornadoes, you can't arrive beforehand to prepare for the storm.
Right.
Like tornadoes are considered no notice events.
Right.
In hurricanes and wildfires, you can set up as a news crew, just like FEMA and other emergency response teams can set up ahead of time in advance to prepare for the storm. Tornadoes are much different. So the tornado swept through and caused catastrophic damage in town after town, and getting all of the help in to clean up and then to eventually down the road help rebuild, just getting there logistically was difficult. So we went back to do a story that will air later, like in a week or two, later this month in February, on the cleanup effort.
Okay.
So like in the county where the town of Mayfield is, and I'm forgetting the name of the county, we met up with FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, and so they have to remove 2 million cubic tons of debris, which is on the same scale as the debris that needed to be removed after 9/11.
Okay. And
so like this is a small community,
right?
But in Kentucky, I mean, this isn't
what part of Kentucky?
Of a major city. Central. Wait, I see it on the map. It's maybe southeast Kentucky, because it's right by. So the way this tornado swept, it started in Arkansas, crossed into Missouri briefly in Tennessee on this like northeast path. There's like tornado interstate that took it up through Mayfield, and then surrounding towns. So like when you're there, I mean, it's just you're surrounded by extreme loss. When you cover something like a hurricane, a lot of the damage is caused by water. So when the water recedes, you still have homes that are standing.
Right.
They are still significantly damaged, but they retain some sense of structure, and the community retains some sense of appearance. When we were in Kentucky with the tornado, like there was no sense of what it looked like before.
And I'm looking up this part. This is far western Kentucky, not too far from Missouri. It's actually west of Indiana. So I mean, this is really the true Midwestern part of the state, not the eastern Appalachian part of Kentucky. So there's definitely tornado within the tornado alley, which most folks wouldn't think of Kentucky as being part of that, but that's the flat section.
And also the time that it hit in December, it was unprecedented because of how late in the year it hit.
Okay. Is there a tornado season?
To say that it's never happened before, but it was.
Is there a tornado season?
Yeah, there are months where typically the cooler months you don't get tornadoes.
Okay.
And it was unseasonably warm in Kentucky, 70 degrees, I think. And this is December, the night that the tornadoes hit, that the supercell moved in, and it was because of the cold air from the north meeting the warm air from the south, which just created this twister and multiple twisters. So yeah, it's kind of like the extreme. It's not the typical season. You don't typically get tornadoes in the winter.
So can you talk more?
But I mean, like all things, wildfire season.
Right.
I was just going to say wildfire season too. Like it's expanding. It used to be during very specific times, late spring, very late spring, early summer into early mid fall, and now it's growing on both ends of those seasons.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more, speaking of that, on your work in wildfires? I mean, it's all throughout the West. I mean, your territory is essentially the west of the Rockies. You're based out in LA, but you do stories all over the Western, particularly wildfires. Yeah.
Well, I'm a West Coast national correspondent, or an LA based national correspondent. So in theory, I go everywhere, but especially with with COVID, we are definitely more assigned to our specific silos,
Right.
just because of the risk of traveling, and getting other crews from other places to meet you. But I came to LA because of wildfires, because I was in London at the time,
Yep.
and I was home on vacation with you and the whole family on Cape Cod, and then got a call to see if I could go and help out with wildfires,
I remember that.
the wildfire coverage,
Right.
because there just been wildfire after wildfire. Everybody was exhausted. They needed backup. So I flew to California to cover a wildfire. That coverage is what ultimately led CBS to ask if I would be interested in moving
Okay.
to California.
Right. Okay.
So wildfires are what brought me to California, and they certainly are the majority of the work and the reporting that I do during the summer
Okay.
and the fall when wildfires are at their worst.
Right.
The wildfire coverage it's insane because California, unlike other states, allows journalists to go wherever firefighters go,
Wow.
as long as they're being safe and staying out of the way and within reason. And so, unlike other parts of the country, in California, you're getting really close to these flames and to the amazing efforts to try to hold them back. And
Yeah.
these firefighters who work around the clock, who never see their family for months,
Okay.
do
Right.
incredible work. And so you're there side by side with them, and and because of the nature of wildfires, and you kind of, once one sparks, we are launched.
Okay.
Sometimes even before one sparks, when there are red flag warnings, which mean like heavy wind,
Right.
and especially when the conditions are dry, I will sometimes be sent somewhere for days just to wait and babysit to see if anything happens.
My. Okay.
And yeah, and that has happened before, as has me being called in the middle of the night because the fire started, and then we have to go off and chase them down. And it's the most interesting work to cover because you're seeing people who are going through like the worst moments of their lives, dealing with so much adversity, overcoming it though. Those that are lucky enough to get out alive.
Right.
And the hope that remains for those that have lost everything, because we've been to a number of towns that have just been completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's also incredible to see like all of the first responders and what they do. And then not only do you have this incredibly visual scene because it's television and fire is visual, but the reason I like covering wildfires is because of the climate change implications and that bigger story of climate change and its impact, as shown through, in the case of the West, wildfires, hurricanes for the South, more and more, science is pointing to tornadoes being the result of climate change. Then obviously you see like extreme weather in Alaska. We went to Alaska once to do something completely opposite of wildfires, where still there are wildfires up in Alaska.
Right.
But a heat wave in the summer where it was over 100 degrees. So it's to be able to tell those stories that are visual, that have really incredible, inspiring characters that also highlight and hopefully open the eyes of viewers to the ramification of climate change, the ramifications.
Right.
I think that's rewarding, and so those are. So I do a lot of this. I do a lot of wildfire coverage because there's a need for it. Right. There's a lot of wildfires, but also I really am drawn to them too. Okay. So I just raised my hand.
And I know that, you were and a producer were in danger and almost died. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, we were. So I was sent to San Francisco because there were red flag warnings.
Okay.
So high wind. It was incredibly dry.
Okay.
And I was in my hotel. I got there late. So I flew from LA to San Francisco, got into the hotel at like 10, fell asleep at 12, got a wake up call from my producer at like 12:30, 1 o'clock, saying that there was a big fire. It was, I believe it was in Napa. Okay. And I took an Uber to go and meet her. I didn't even get a rental car because I wasn't sure how long I was really going to have to babysit. Right. I didn't think there was going to be any fire. And I met her, and she was driving a vintage Mercedes, like from the 70s. I think it was a Mercedes. And I was thinking to myself, how is this thing going to survive a fire, like get us into a fire? Because you're going off road, right, and you're going to places where firefighters go. So I was very worried about that. Yeah. But we got there, we drove up this hill. When we arrived kind of close to where the fire was, the roads were blocked off. There were a lot of people evacuating the area. We were allowed to go in because of our press credentials. We went up to kind of the top of this hill to overlook what was like a fire burning in the very far distance. The wind was very calm. It did not look like it was going to be the kind of story that we would actually end up going live with.
Right.
Like it kind of seemed like a false alarm. But then the wind picked up. And like within a matter of minutes, the wall of that fire traveled probably a mile to where we were.
Wow.
And at the time, my producer was in her car, just sitting there doing some other work for the morning show. She was ahead of us, in front of fire trucks. I was with my photographer. We were behind the fire trucks.
Right.
We were kind of like nestled actually in between two lines of fire trucks, and the firefighters started to yell, "Get out, get out, get out."
Okay.
And so we got into our car. I went with my photographer since I was closest to him. Chris, my producer, was in her Mercedes, so she drove ahead. The fire trucks in the first line were right behind her, and then we followed that line of fire trucks as we were sandwiched in by another line behind us.
Right.
But the fire came so close to us on both sides of this road now, and it was so dark, it got pitch black with all the smoke, everything that was burning, that we could no longer see the taillights of the fire trucks. So we took a turn off of a road that we thought was the correct turn, thinking we were following the trucks, only to realize that we were down the road got narrower, narrower, narrower. It was a dirt road, and it was clearly not the road that we thought we were on. And at this point, the fire was coming up on both sides of this small, narrow road, hitting the windows, filling the car up with smoke, and we came to a dead end. At the end of this, we were hoping that we could get out, that there was a way out at the end of this, because we could not turn around. It was too narrow. So we didn't know what to do at this dead end. Like, do we wait here and just hope that the fire doesn't pass this exact area? Because the way that the road looked when we were getting it was way too dangerous. And what if a tree limb fell? Right. But like, we knew we had to because the smoke was getting so thick. So we drove back the way that we came.
In reverse,
at this point, driving over embers.
Were you able to reverse?
No. We were able to turn around at the dead end.
Okay.
We were able to turn around at the dead end.
Right.
There was just enough space to turn around at this dead end, and we drove back down the road. And at this point, the road was on fire, and so we were worried about the tires exploding. I'm surprised they didn't. And like in that moment, we're like, so many things. More things could go wrong than could go right in this moment. But like, fortunately, everything went right. I mean, I'm here, so it's fine. But we went back later, like in the day, because this was early in the morning. This was at like 3:00 in the morning. It was like super early. We were getting ready for the morning show. And a tree had a limb fell down because of the fire. I mean, the fire ripped through there, but limbs of trees had fallen down, blocking up the road. So we were very lucky, because had we tried to leave later,
could have been another minute.
Who would have known? Who knows?
Right.
So, yeah, could have been a different situation.
So you mentioned a cameraman, a producer. Tell me about what the setup is, your average crew when you're out doing a show, is there more of a skeleton crew if you're doing a hurricane versus other stories? What's the typical setup look like?
It all depends on the story. So like a hurricane, a bigger crew. Okay. Typically you travel with a photographer, a producer, and a audio technician.
Okay.
And nowadays we use what they're called live views. They're backpacks that use cellular data to go live.
Okay.
So it's very compact. It's very compact. We don't always need a live truck, but for hurricanes and for wildfires, that situation is scaled up to include a live truck and a live truck operator.
Okay.
Because in extreme weather, it's really hard and not guaranteed that you could go live through cellular data.
Okay.
And in smaller news events, things that tend to be like more cerebral enterprise stories that aren't breaking news, sometimes we scale down so that it could be just myself, a photographer, and a producer. But more often than not, we're a team of 4.
Okay.
Myself, the producer, audio guy. photographer.
So what does a producer do?
The producer makes sure everything that goes to air is right. I mean, that's also my job as well, but two heads are better than one. Two
Right.
minds are better than one. And they help find stories.
Gotcha.
If it's a story we're enterprising, if it's a story that we're searching for, that we want to go and do, that's not breaking news, the producer will oftentimes help with research, help with setting up interviews, identifying the best people to interview. Then when you go into the field, they help with all the logistics. They help organize the crew,
Right.
who's going to be coming. They always make sure that whatever we're filming, whatever questions I'm asking, that they lend themselves well to what we hope the finished product will be for the story. And then in the case of enterprise stories, where it's kind of like a takeout piece where you go in somewhere and take the video back home and edit later, they'll sit down with an editor in an edit suite, and we'll go through every shot as they're piecing together the script that I oftentimes write. Sometimes they'll help with writing. Sometimes I will do all the setup, and I will set up the story myself, and then find a producer that will go with me. So nothing, everybody kind of helps out to some extent with everyone else's role.
Right.
But that's mainly what they do.
All right. We've been talking about forest fires, and you're talking about the human element in a lot of the stories that you do. And I know you've got a book that you're working on, which touches on a lot of that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So after that near death experience, which is not part of this book at all, but I wrote like a short story, that described it. And I had a few people reach out to me saying that it would make a good book.
Okay.
And I didn't take it really all that seriously, but I doubled down a few months later. Actually, was it a few months later? Yeah, at this point it was a few months later, and I really started to, or no, it was like a year later. I decided, you know what, I will start to focus on a book. I wasn't sure what it would be about. I knew that climate change would be the overall theme, but I wasn't sure the direction it would take. And so what I did was I wrote a short story about the 2020 wildfire season, which was historic here in California, like a lot of devastation. And I just Googled like best literary agents in New York, and then sent in this 10-page thing. And one of them, a few wrote back, and a few were interested, but one of them I really liked, and saw, envisioned the book the way I did, had really great ideas for maybe how to take it to the next level, or to perhaps streamline it and make it a little bit simpler. And so I spent a few months working with him, putting together a book proposal, which is essentially an outline and includes a chapter excerpt to give publishers an idea of what they're getting into. Right. And so thanks to that proposal, my literary agent submitting it, there were a few publishers that were interested. One Signal, which is a Simon & Schuster imprint, is the one that ultimately I went with, just signed the book deal, and they're great and they're amazing. And the book's called Before It's Gone. Okay. And it's about changing slices of Americana that are at a crossroads. Okay. Our disappearing landmarks, how that impacts society, humanity, our unique cultures, and the need for ingenuity to preserve this American way. Okay.
And in a nutshell. And it tells personal. I mean, it brings personal stories into about climate change.
Yeah. It's so I focus on people that I've met and connected with in each of these in each of these stories that make up the book. It's told in part through my lens and me being out there in the field, the extreme environments that we report from. but then it dives much deeper into the people we meet along the way.
Okay.
So the Paradise Fire, which was in 2018, which destroyed the town of Paradise.
Yes, I remember.
There's a family there that I've been in touch with from pretty much the beginning and have revisited several times now at this point and spoken to many times. So they kind of, through their eyes, you see the story of Paradise unfold. Okay. And that's an easy example. There's a bunch of other examples in other towns across the country like that. I mean,
I think it's important. There's so many books that come out about climate change. I mean, not to say they're a dime a dozen, but I mean, people understand the premise. Yes, the climate is changing, but for policymakers to understand the human element that goes into it, I think that's really important. There's a famous quote attributed to Mussolini that one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. Tough to say, but and it's very true. And you talk about how it could affect the globe, and it just doesn't resonate with people as much as being able to tell the story of a family or an entire town that's just disappeared. And I think that's
I mean, people don't connect emotionally with science and with numbers, right? But people connect emotionally with people, right? And if the people that they're connecting with are the face of that science, the face of climate change in this case, I think it makes for content that is easier to absorb and retain, and like the information easier to retain. Right. So I mean, all of these characters I think are incredible people. I think they're all very inspiring people. I don't think this book. I don't want it to hit people over the head, about climate change, because I think at this point, people know it exists, and if they don't think it exists, I don't think there's a heck of a lot that's going to change their mind unless they come face to face with some extreme weather event. So it's not meant to reach those people. It's meant to reach people that would pick up a science book. Which I don't know how many of them there are, or pick up the other books that focus on climate writing, that go deeper into the numbers, but maybe they're looking for an escape to get into, the characters, the people that define, what America is today and how they're being impacted. Gotcha. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I do. I
think it's interesting.
It's February, and I just saw just saw something. The whole country there's just a cold front heading across the country from northeast to right now the Great Lakes region, Texas, and then down in Florida. And there was a story that I know very well about iguanas falling from the tree. So I wanted to play, if we could, 30 seconds of that clip.
When the temperature drops, so do they. They've long been a Floridian urban legend, but clearly they exist. Kamikaze iguanas plummeting from their treetop perches. I found him while searching the grounds of a Broward County golf course around 3 a.m. Scientists say these seemingly suicidal lizards are a result of South Florida's record cold weather. The iguana prefer temperatures in the 80s and 90s. This morning at 35 degrees, this one is practically frozen in his tracks. Now, these iguanas aren't actually dead. When temperatures drop below 40 degrees, their bodies go into a type of hibernation state where they essentially turn off. Once temperatures rise again above 40 degrees, they'll be revived.
All right, well, all right. I love it. I love it. I love it. Seemingly suicidal lizards. Did you write that yourself? That was pretty good alliteration there.
Yeah,
All right, so kamikaze.
Really working the words.
All right, so kamikaze iguanas. Is it a better LA hip hop collective or Japanese punk band?
I don't know. I think we'll go with hip hop maybe. It just sounds like a
So tell us about that story. I mean, that was one for the local ABC affiliate in Miami.
Yeah, that's my claim to fame. That story. Everybody knows me by that story. And by everybody, I just mean the people that I work with, because nobody knows who I am. But it's the and to this day, Jimmy Kimmel just 2 days ago or 3 days ago used that exact video
Get
when
outta here.
talking about frozen iguana. Because it's like because I don't nobody has since, because I was the first one to film iguanas. I went and filmed that by myself, to film iguanas in the middle of the night.
Right,
I was there from 11 to 4 in the middle of the night.
waiting for an iguana to
And I had
fall
the
out of
camera
tree.
set, and there were iguanas everywhere, and they were falling everywhere. But every time I would set up my camera to get it, I would miss it because it would just start falling. So I decided I just have to be patient. I just set up the camera for I think it was 30 minutes, and it fell. It was like hanging on a branch that was so obvious this thing was not going to be able to hold the weight of this for much longer. It had clearly fallen from somewhere up higher.
Right.
And right around it, there were other iguanas dangling from branches too, but the other branches were bigger, and it didn't look like those were going to work out. And then everywhere underneath them, there was a dozen in just this one spot of iguanas that had fallen already from the branches.
Okay.
So I filmed it, and yes, it went viral back before there were really such things as viral videos.
So, I mean, can you explain why
2011.
2011. Can you explain why iguanas were?
Yeah, they're an invasive species.
Right.
Yeah. So they're an invasive species. They were introduced to Florida because of careless pet owners. Typically, Florida is very warm and a perfect second habitat for them. But when it gets really cold, and I think more and more cold snaps like that are happening in Florida. I mean, it was it dipped below freezing, I think, in some areas. Hence frozen iguanas, because they're not used to that kind of cold climate. Their body, as almost an emergency response, goes into a hibernative state.
Okay.
So in theory, they're fine. Although I think that if it remains cold for too long, it's like freezing something. They don't come back to life.
Okay.
But in theory, for a short period of time, and in Florida, it's never that cold for too long. They thaw out and they come back to their to their environment.
And that was I think you had interviewed a zookeeper or wildlife specialist, and people would bring them into their car.
Ron McGill,
and then they would basically wake up in the heat, and people would be startled and freaked out.
Yeah. Ron McGill is Zoo Miami. He's awesome. I think he's still there. He was describing a situation where a guy went with his pickup truck to get all these iguanas that were frozen on the ground. It wasn't really clear what that guy was trying to do, why he was putting them in the back of his pickup, if he knew that they would wake up or something. But I think it was implied in the way that Ron was describing it, and I can't remember the interview at this point, but I remember that one part. So it wasn't clear to me if the guy knew that they would wake up, but I think clearly from how Ron described it, he didn't know, and he was startled to find out that there were a dozen iguanas now alive in the back of his pickup truck, scratching around as he was driving.
Well, if you want to find it, easy to find. I'll link it, but just look up Kamikaze Iguanas on YouTube. You'll see the video there. Well, to wrap up on the lighter note.
Riveting stuff.
I mean, it is. It's great. I mean, the writing was very good, John. I mean,
just like this podcast. This podcast is riveting. Wow, my best work.
So any news? I mean, because you're not doing as much live stuff anymore. I mean, have you've been pretty news blooper free? I mean, anything that you could think of that where you made a funny on air?
I'm sure. Yeah, of course. But I don't. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to share any of those stories.
I'll remember one, and it was pretty innocuous. So I'll share it. It was Whitney Houston's funeral in Newark. Do you remember that? Where I think it took a while.
Yeah, but I don't remember that being a moment. I don't remember that being me.
Well, I think
how did that end in embarrassment?
The funeral was taking a while to start, and you were outside, and you were going live, and you said, "Yeah, the funeral is about to kick off." And yeah, that was your blue.
Oh, that was yeah. It was a Poor wording.
Yes.
But that was not Whitney Houston. Thank you very much. That was in Florida.
Oh, it was in Florida? I thought it was
No, it was in Florida. It was a Nope, you're so wrong.
I mean, you were there, so you would know.
I also have sources, people who watch this unfold and still make fun of me today for that. So they will confirm this unfolded in Florida.
So what was the circumstance there? Do you remember whose funeral it was?
I don't. I think it was a police officer. I think it was a fallen police officer, which made it even worse. I think I caught myself too. And what I love is you're telling this story not because you saw it, because you definitely didn't see it. You heard the story retold.
I did.
So fake news to you.
Well, I mean, you know,
Sorry,
the best bloopers, and you know, when I've got nothing better to do and happen to be on YouTube, the news blooper compilations are great. They're a great time waster. I highly recommend it. My favorite is the rowboat. There's a woman. It's a flood, and I believe it's in New Jersey. And she's the newscaster. She's in a rowboat, and she's paddling, or it's a canoe or whatever it is, like it's, you know, flooded 4 or 5 feet, and then right behind her walks the guy, and the water is like just barely over the top of his shoes. That one, and
that's embarrassing.
There's another one where they interview. This wasn't a blooper for the newscaster, but they're interviewing a couple running during a snowstorm. And the woman's like, you know, the snow, it's the perfect texture for running. And, you know, they're talking about how it's so great and riding a bike is scary. And so they run away and she falls flat on her face. That and animals.
Yeah, but it is the Zen quality to their interview before she falls, how she talks about how soft and how it's actually easier to run on the knees in snow.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, it's easier. And then she falls. I think that interview is also what made that blooper a blooper, not just because she fell.
Well, I lost you there for a minute, but just to wrap up, thank you for joining us. And how can people learn more about you? I know the book is a work in progress. It'll be sometime before it does come out. But when's your next piece running on CBS Sunday Morning or 48 Hours, or when can folks see you on the news?
Well, you can find me on CBS next week. I'll be doing the tornado story that I did. That story will air next week, and then I think a week or two after that, a 48 Hours episode will air on a Saturday sometime.
Okay.
This month.
Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah.
A sneak peek?
It is I don't know if I could say too much yet. It's a story about a missing woman and a community coming together to find her, and the husband who is the focus of the ongoing investigation. That's all I can say.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mark.